Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to address the autumn session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Allow me to express my sadness at the passing of Lord Russell Johnston, who was your peer for 23 years and who ably presided over this Assembly between 1999 and 2002. Lord Russell Johnston worked tirelessly on human rights issues until the very end, and our thanks and our sympathies go to his loved ones. Ladies and gentlemen, Bosnia and Herzegovina highly values the work of the Council of Europe and its bodies and institutions. We have often been direct beneficiaries of this work and have, as a result of it, made improvements with respect to the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. And it is the rule of law, the human rights, and the democracy that I intend to say a few words about this. For this, I convey you the gratitude of the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are mindful, Mr. President, however, that we continue to face a number of obstacles. We have a long way to go before Bosnia and Herzegovina is able to live up to the principles that constitute the very foundation of this body. Even the progress that Bosnia and Herzegovina has made often falls prey to the discriminatory arrangements that are built into our system and governance. While Bosnia and Herzegovina was among the first 5 countries to ratify Protocol 12 to the European Convention, it is the only country in Europe and the world whose constitution bars some of its citizens from seeking office solely on the basis of their ethnicity. To be sure, the Dayton Peace Agreement from 1995 ended the war, aggression and genocide. Its value in such a context cannot be denied. But this peace agreement was also intended to reduce discrimination and reverse the effects of genocide and ethnic cleansing. On paper, it had all the necessary elements to do so. Indeed, Annex 7 of this peace agreement, Dayton Agreement, guarantees that all refugees and displaced persons shall have a right to return in safety without risk of harassment, intimidation, persecution, or discrimination, particularly on account of their ethnic origin. In practice, and in the words of the Bosnia and Herzegovina Constitutional Court, quote, "A systemic, continuing, and deliberate practice of the public authorities of Republika Srpska," which is the entity, one of the 2 entities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the goal of preventing the so-called minority returns, either through direct participation in violent incidents or through the abdication of responsibility to protect the people from violent attacks due solely to their ethnic background. End quote. Ladies and gentlemen, this matter clearly is not solely our concern. On the contrary, we are hearing statements this week in these halls here in this building that the right to return in another European context is not an important right, as demonstrated by the fact that it was never implemented in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Do these statements suggest that Republika Srpska has succeeded in creating an international precedent? Does one get to keep the ethnically clean slate created by butchering and expelling those who are different? If that is allowed in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it will serve as a dangerous precedent and will seriously undermine these institutions' other objectives in my country and elsewhere. Dayton was clearly not designed with a la carte implementation in mind, as one of its components cannot function without full functioning of the others too. Obstruction of some of Dayton's elements was born precisely out of a desire to stifle democracy and preserve ethnocracy. One effect of this obstruction is that entity voting has morphed into an ethno-territorial mechanism whereby only 22% of deputies in the state parliament, only 22% of the deputies in the state parliament, all of them coming from one ethnicity, the Serbs, and all of them from one entity, Republika Srpska, can block any decision they desire. Indeed, precisely because 1.2 million people have never returned, there are only 2 non-Serb deputies from the RS, which is far from enough to unblock obstruction. Conversely, since a vote from the Republika Srpska is worth double a federation vote under this system of entity voting, this is a one-sided mechanism. And the question is, what has this way of voting in the parliament been used for? Just in the last 2 years, it was employed 5 times to block changes to the citizenship law that would permit dual citizenship. Unless these changes, modeled on the European practice, are passed, over 500,000 Bosnian refugees who fled the country, not, of course, of their own volition, but under the threat of death, stand to lose their native Bosnia and Herzegovina citizenship. In general, it is not the implementation of Dayton, but the violation of its core principles that led to the ethnic apartheid we see today in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to start a work on a new constitution, and allowing this practice to continue will not make that process a successful one. Instead, we will see secretive and pressurized negotiations resulting in a flawed document. I know this because I was there 2 years ago when the April package of amendments that the Venice Commission heavily criticized was offered instead of a meaningful constitutional reform. You know as well, because you were here at the time, adopting a report that unequivocally stated that it was, quote, this entity voting system, the insistence on it, and its political implications, which is to blame for the failure of the constitutional initiative, not a handful of individual representatives.